Okay. So, hello, everyone. This is Stephanie Weir with the Nature Conservancy, and I'd like to welcome you to the call. Can I ask, Jeff, you can put yourself on mute because I'm getting some feedback there. Thanks. And to begin by saying that today's call is part of a series of hot topic calls on coral reef conservation hosted by the Nature Conservancy as part of our Global Reef Resilience Program, and it's made possible by the generous support of NOAA's Coral Reef Conservation Program and the MacArthur Foundation. At the end of the call, I will share some upcoming opportunities for training and webinars and new resources that are part of the Global Reef Resilience Program. So during today's webinar, we'll have a presentation from Dr. Jeff Maynard, and following Jeff's presentation, we will have a question and discussion period. During this question period, if you'd like to ask a question, you can raise your hand within WebEx by clicking on the hand icon above your chat box. That will alert us that you would like to ask a question, and then we can unmute you and allow you to speak. And also submit your question using the chat panel if you'd prefer. Please be sure to include your institution and name with your question so we know who's asking. And also please note that the chat box gives you options to privately message an individual or the group. So just to make note of who you're messaging if you do use the chat box. So go ahead and get started. For today's call, you're going to be hearing about recent advances in monitoring for resilience. This is an area of work that has been ongoing for several years, and recently there's been a great deal of work focused on refining the monitoring tools to ultimately simplify the process for coral reef managers and also make monitoring more meaningful in management activities. So I'm going to introduce Jeff, and then he'll get started with his presentation. Dr. Jeff Maynard is an adjunct scientist with the Australian Centre of Excellence for Risk Analysis at the University of Melbourne. He manages projects for and in collaboration with governments, industry, and conservation-based NGOs in Australia, the Coral Triangle, the Pacific, and the US. Jeff divides his time between contract work and working on research grants and academic publications. Sorry, my screen's going crazy here. His focuses on questions surrounding coral reef vulnerability to climate change and is particularly interested in providing managers with tools that enable informed planning at multiple space scales, and that's what we're going to be hearing more about from Jeff today. Jeff's recently been working with our global program and our Indonesia program to answer these questions and to help us improve our tools and resources that are through the Reef Resilience Network. So I thank you, Jeff, for joining us. I know this is the second time today, and appreciate you accommodating folks from different parts of the world and different time zones. That's great. And I just want to turn it over to you now.
Introduction, Steph. Go when you see the presentation starting.
Okay, yep. You can see the screens popping up. There you go. You're all set.
So from Steph, good afternoon, everyone, or evening or morning, depending on where you are. As Steph mentioned, I've been working for the Global Marine Program at the Nature Conservancy as a contractor this year. I usually divide my time between research and contract work, and I've been specializing these last few years in providing decision support tools to coral reef managers. This talk titled "Using Coral Reef Resilience Assessments to Inform Management Decision Making," a project that a large group has been collaborating on since 2009, and in some ways even before that. Wilson is the project co-leader, and she's leading in and is on the panel tonight. And Rizia Arjuwijaya, Stuart Campbell, Sangeeta Mungbai, Jenzi Sartan, and Nanang Satayas have led and/or been major contributors to data collection and parts of the analysis. I'm on behalf of all of them as well. A large number of other people have been key to the project's success, only some of which are listed on the slide. It was a bit of a challenge to prepare this presentation. I went through several versions and tried to find a balance between explaining some of the technical details for those more interested in the method versus more on the results of the assessment. It's possible I won't have time to provide detail on a part of our work or this topic that really interests you. So if that happens, feel free to ask questions at the end, or I'll definitely make time to follow up with you offline. Okay, about coral reef resilience and management decision making. That slide is a common definition of resilience that comes from the Resilience Alliance and Resilience Guru Brian Walker. For coral reefs, resilience is the maintenance of and/or quick recovery to a coral-dominated state that can use to provide a range of ecosystem services that hundreds of millions of people have grown to depend on. Now, I've broken the concept up, and throughout the presentation, into the components of resilience that managers really care about: resistance and recovery. Resilience for our work refers to withstanding the sorts of stress that commonly causes bleaching, and amounts to recovery from any type of disturbance. Resilience is a hugely powerful and popular concept, and it's become key to coral reef conservation efforts. Just earlier today, I found out that the phrase coral reef resilience can be found 140,000 web pages, 1.4 million pages if those three words as the phrase are broken up. Those are also contained in the titles and abstracts of 12,700 peer-reviewed articles and technical reports. So, know what resilience means. In one another, though, we're still working through how to take account of it when making management decisions. I see three different types of actions managers can take to build resilience into conservation and management decision-making. We can, in the hope of having people change to more environmentally conscious and/or sustainable behavior, and we can take for policy change on emissions, and a lot of that has happened and is continuing to happen. It can also be key to the other types of action options we have. We can replicate all habitat types and energy regimes in marine parks that provide the protection of critical areas and take out connectivity. And once parks are established, we can manage them effectively. Now, the last two, number 3 and 4, these summarize the TNC resilience model and really the focus of our discussion today. So in particular, I'm going to focus on identifying the resistant, resilient sites that are and are going to increasingly be the critical areas. These are the sites likely to persist and sites that could provide the seeds of recovery for other disturbed sites. We'll talk about reducing anthropogenic stressors and implicit in the protection of sites in a marine park. Protection can mean a lot of things, so we'll discuss the value of assessing stressors that could be reducing resilience. Some common questions that managers have about building resilience into management and conservation planning. I've included these questions in an effort to show exactly how a coral reef resilience assessment can be useful in addressing concerns that you may have in managing your area. That not all are going to apply to everyone, but answers to all can be provided by a resilience assessment when they are analyzed and presented, as I'll show you. So let's quickly do these questions. The first, which is likely to have the greatest resilience, and are these sites currently protected? Again, protection can mean a lot of things. Are there sites with high resilience that are under severe stress from activities that managers can limit, so thinking that we can do something about? Third, which stressors related to human activities are most reducing resilience among a group of sites? Do the protected sites in the MPA you manage have greater resilience than the unprotected sites? Does resilience and/or anthropogenic stress vary much from site to site? So it's viable for resilience to be a more important consideration than, for example, cultural values or biodiversity, and do target actions to specific sites. Tools to managers and researchers that can help to answer some of the questions I've just posed. And West and Rod Solom of TNC, they wrote a review in 2003 of sorts of resilience and resistance characteristics that are worth assessing at reef sites to identify sites to protect. This is really the launching pad for the idea that factors that confer resilience can be scored averaged to produce a resilient score and ranked based on those scores. That meta and idea was packaged in the IUCN 2009 Global Coral Reef Resilience Assessment Protocol, which formed the basis for this study. It identified all of the factors they could come up with at the time that could confer resilience to a coral reef. They came up with 61 in total. The more factors you include, the more did the influence of each factor on the final resilience score. Now, resilience assessment protocols have been developed, including the example shown to the right, where it was first shown resilience assessments become more powerful decision-making tools when factors are included and when a score is calculated for all sites that describe a level of stress from human activities. So that's on top of the resilience score. I'm going to adjust that concept, combining assessments of resilience with assessments of anthropogenic stress in more detail over the next 20 minutes. So also, some of the global guidance is summarized in TNC's Reef Resilience module for the toolkit. They work to bridge the gap between collecting data in the field and and judgments about resilience factors and the eventual conservation management decision. So a few examples of resilience factors are shown on the bottom left. Guidance is provided on the factors to collect data in the protocol, and to a lesser extent, some guidance is provided on the type of analysis that can be undertaken. We've quickly reviewed the protocol with the aim of making it easier to analyze, interpret, and communicate the results of the resilience assessment. So that's the red box I'm showing now. The bits of the process we wanted to make easier. In particular, as you know from this talk's title, we really work to make sure that management decisions can be informed by undertaking the resilience assessment. So specific objectives with this. So we want to assess the resilience of sites in study areas spread across the Indonesian archipelago and structure the analysis in a way that maximizes the capacity to inform decision-making and have to be repeatable. We want other people to be able to learn from what we've done. And secondly, to offer recommendations on the back results, next steps for the working area so that resilience assessments can become more defensible and more powerful management tools. Our areas are spread across the archipelago, and there are current or proposed government-controlled marine park areas or community-managed areas within these study areas, as I've referred to them. On the far left is in northwest Sumatra, Jawa is in central Java, Lombok included sites around Bali, Lombok, and the Gili Islands, Wakatoa, Sulawesi, and Kofa is in the famed Rampot and Bird's Head region of West Papua. This represents the largest scale, so the largest geographic scale or number of sites resilience assessment that's ever been undertaken. On all 61 of the resilience factors presented in IUCN 2009, and we scored each site using the Likert scale scoring for all the factors. And all was in keeping with the published guidelines, the IUCN protocol. We then viewed the list of factors, and we culled those we thought had weak relationship with either resistance or recovery. We then classified the rest of the factors as relating to resistance, recovery, resilience, which is both resistance and recovery, and factors that managers can influence, the anthropogenic stressors. And I'm going to show a table in a second that sort of capture that in your mind. Then we ranked sites based on their resilience, classified scores for all of our factor categories as being low, medium, or high. You'll see results, and I'll show you in the coming slides. You'll see that we've organized the results specifically to answer the 5 questions that I posed at the beginning of the presentation. Coming through 2 method slides quickly, and then we'll get on to discussing some of the results. Today, importantly, is on using the data once you have it to make a range of management decisions. You have the data, though, and this is as daunting as 60 factors makes it sound. So some of the factors are quantitatively assessed, and these data is gathered on scuba or snorkel, and factors are commonly captured using standard core monitoring protocols. So many of you are highly likely to already have a lot of data that you require to complete the assessment. Others are semi-quantitatively assessed using a range of data sources, as well as expert judgment. Now, this expert judgment amounts to talking to someone with a high degree of local knowledge about the factor and the extent to which that factor varies among the sites in your area of interest. Everyone, though, can do a resilience assessment like this one. My table shows that we only used roughly 40 of the 61 factors. It's a lie, but I'm going to give you a moment to scan through and see some of the types of factors that are measured or estimated when undertaking a resilience assessment. But I want you to see that we classified the factors into categories: resilience, recovery, and both together, which produce the resilience score. And we kept the stressors that managers can do something about separate, and you see those now on the right. We either didn't have information on the excluded factors, or no relationship to resilience, or applied our study sites, or combination of those. Let's walk you through this results table quickly, which it becomes so this is the group of sites I showed you on our map that's the first of the northwest. It's in Sumatra. So sites have been listed from highest resilience to lowest resilience, which is shown in the rank column. It's right next to the dark arrow. And 4 of the factor categories all four of them, the range of scores for that category that corresponds to high, medium, and low is shown as green, yellow, and red, respectively, and those are within the blue box on the right. The park zoning is all shown, and that's in the darkly shaded box. Rather, and for a moment, because it's a really important concept to how this works. Published resilience assessment protocols are hailed as being global, but it's only true in part. So the approach is useful in all reef regions, but the resultant scores, the resilient scores you see in the first column that's colored, can only be compared to scores within the pool of sites in analysis. Scale scores given for each of the factors used are based on the range of that factor in the study area, and not range in that factor when all reef sites in the world are considered. So here, for abundance, it was given a 5 that had high herbivore abundance relative only to other sites in this management area. So this is a really important point we can discuss more during question time if people are unsure about this. The point is that only standard criteria for the scoring of all factors will produce scores comparable at any spatial scale. And it's moving in direction, but that some of that represents future work that I'll run through on the second slide. Let's now do the answers to the questions I posed for our study areas. And from this point forward, I'm only going to show you parts of this type of results table. The first related to identifying sites that have high resilience that are not currently protected. So these are at the top of the table. Importantly, this is a simple Excel-based production that we produced that automated analyzing the data so that we could produce the tables quickly for any of the sets of data that we have. So you can see that 3 of the high resilience sites are currently unprotected, so they're use zones. I'm using protected here really loosely to mean human activity at the site, particularly fishing, is restricted. So there are no-take areas in this particular example, but wouldn't have to be. A range of other potential regulatory measures may be in place in the use zones I list here. This should be generally applicable. In most types of MPAs, there are areas with heightened restrictions. The 3 sites that have arrows in the slide could represent conservation and management priorities when the park is rezoned. Now, so you know all of our 5 study areas have high or medium resilient sites that are in use zones. And protecting these sites could maximize the number of healthy sites in the area when disturbance frequencies increase. This assumes, though, that other resilience-based park planning principles like representation and replication and connectivity are taken into account. The second question involves identifying the sites that have high resilience. And again, they're shown in green here in the resilience column, but the high resilience sites that have low scores for anthropogenic stress. It's consistent across the table. Low scores are poor scores. So those scores for the factors interest can influence, the anthropogenic stressors, means that stress is severe relative to that being experienced at other sites. And there are 2 such sites, both are in use areas, and fishing pressure, especially on herbivores, is high at each site, further increasing the impetus to consider protecting these sites in the next rezoning. Now, remember, even for our study, the analysis results you're seeing simply work to produce recommendations. These sites may be incredibly important to local artisanal fishers, so a range of other considerations are going to have to be taken into account before you protect the site, which may not mean establishing a no-take area as there are other options. So is that resilience can be explicitly included in the decision-making process. Here's the way that, so this is still questions 1 and 2, but it's another way that we presented our data to inform communication with managers and as a follow-on management decision-making, which was our goal. This worked well for colleagues involved in this project that worked with me to produce these maps. We high, medium, and low resilient sites, but we've represented the data spatially, and we give each site a different symbol, depending on if the site is in a no-take or use zone. The number of sites you see have low scores for anthropogenic stress, so they benefit from targeted action to reduce stress to support the resilience of those reefs. So this is an example of a way to capture data aside from the table. The data from a resilience assessment, though, it's easy for people to digest and communicate about. Let's talk through management questions. This is identifying the types of stressors for each management area that sites are consistently scoring poorly for. These are the 16 in the table that you see in the blue box. These are the ones that managers could potentially influence. I put X's in the boxes for the factors that had amongst the lowest 4 average scores. Now, this is the case everywhere, but for this group of 5 study areas, fishing pressure, particularly of herbivores, is consistently amongst the lowest scoring factors for the fact that managers can do something about. It's not surprising in Indonesia and forming a part of our working group's ongoing efforts to manage your colleagues and counterparts to encourage fishers to be selective and to comply with existing species gear, quota, and space-based fishing restrictions. The idea, though, is that the risk assessment identified which types of stressors managers need to be focusing on, enabling them to build taking action into long-term planning. Questions relate to the extent to which resilience has already been built into park planning and assessing whether resilience varies sufficiently to drive decision-making processes, given the large number of other considerations managers have to take account of when parks are planned and revised. Here we go. The average resilience score of sites designated no-take is higher in Aceh and Bali Lombok than that are currently in use zones. These areas, resilience factors, some of the resilience indicators I've shown, those factors have already been taken into account when park is zoned, but if you look at this, that's true in the other three study areas, with no difference between average scores for the two types of zoning. In these in particular, the areas to the right, protecting more of the high and medium resilient sites could maximize the number of healthy sites as disturbance frequencies increase, which is of course what we expect as the climate changes. Now, one study area where scores are higher for sites designated no-take than for designated for use, and a study area where the reverse is true. Again, so 2/3 of high resilient sites are in no-take areas. And here, so none of the top 7 ranked sites in Karimanjawa are in no-take areas at the moment. And last management question, we calculated the coefficient of variation, or the CV, for each of our factor categories. The CV is a really simple statistic. It's the same deviation divided by mean times out, and it measures dispersions. How different are sites from one another really? If scores don't vary much from the mean, then the CV will be low. And the less different the resilience scores are for each site, the less important resilience may be as a consideration when making management or conservation decisions. This whole anthropogenic stress 2 we discussed in question numbers 2 and 3. Stress is the same everywhere, so the CV is very low. Dealing with that stress may still be extremely critical, and assuming that the stress is severe, and that's why it's not different at different sites. But a broad scale action rather than a specific action at a specific site. Call the example. So the CV for anthropogenic stress is low, and the CV for resilience is low. In area, anthropogenic stress is actually really limited, and reefs are similar nearly everywhere. So though resilience-based park planning principles are still useful, resilience won't be as useful when selecting sites to protect as it might be in some of the other study areas we have. For example, Aceh and Bali Lombok, CVs are high for both resilience and anthropogenic stress. So though I showed just above that sites designated no-take have higher average resilience scores in these two study areas, there are still high and medium resilient sites in both of these areas that managers could consider protecting during the rezoning. And there are lots of sites that would benefit from reduction in stress in all 5 of the study areas. We use this as a way to prioritize which parks to invest resources in, giving us a sort of region-wide rather than just study area-wide capacity to make decisions or discuss potential decisions with some of your counterparts. There are different types of management actions you could take following taking a resilience assessment, and I've listed them on the right. You can use resilience to select sites to protect and implement broad-scale actions to reduce stress and implement local-scale actions to reduce stress. And the results of a resilience assessment can work as a decision support framework of sorts, helping you understand which combination of action options you should implement. You simply answer the questions I've posed during the presentation. I'll show you now what I mean. Let's start from where we just left off. It doesn't vary much from site to site. Scores don't vary, then you might not prioritize resilience as an information layer over the large number of other considerations when planning parks, and rely on resilience-based park planning principles, representation and replication, and connectivity. If resilience scores do vary a lot, you'll want to check to see whether there's evidence that resilience has already been built into your park plan. This was the first question we went through. If scores on average for protected sites are not higher than scores for unprotected sites, you'll make sure resilience is used to select sites to protect when rezoning. Even resilience scores on average are higher for protected sites. I showed you was the case for 2 of our study areas. likely there are still high resilient sites currently unprotected. You have to make as many changes as in the other scenario. So here we're talking using resilience to select sites to protect. Let's now talk about action options 2 and 3, which are reducing stress. If stress doesn't vary much, then implement actions that reduce stress at a large number of sites. If anthropogenic stress vary greatly between your sites, there's probably scope to target a local scale action to reduce the stressor, high or medium resilient sites. And these may be mutually exclusive. You may, of course, consider implementing both broad scale actions and local scale actions. What this decision support framework meant for the study we undertook in Indonesia. Here's the results. Management anthropogenic stress scores vary more greatly in some study areas than others. That's what we found. It's already built into the design of some parks, but not all. Represent more severe stressors than others, and this varies among study areas. In areas, there are high resilient sites that would benefit from the targeted reduction of a stressor related to human activities. In our areas, there are high resilient sites that are within use zones. On the process, how do you go about conducting these assessments and when you undertake an assessment? We train staff as part of this project to communicate results to managers. But importantly, you could continue the decision support framework I just described by working on which targeted local scale actions to mitigate stressors at resilient sites are actually feasible for managers. You could prioritize those that are feasible. That's one to include measures in a discussion about these resilience assessments could inform decisions they make. Better managers could and when possible should be involved in the entire assessment. That was the case for the study I mentioned earlier from the Great Barrier Reef in 2008. Managers helped both collect and analyze the data so we're familiar with the results and their implications. I've been through this presentation how resilience assessments can provide answers to these questions. But they're only true if resilience assessments are undertaken before the decisions are made. I'm mentioning this to help people understand the importance of time here. More can be gained when undertaking the assessment if it's time to ensure the results can inform management decisions. Priming or rezoning of a park is a prime example of a management decision that resilience assessment might inform, of course. Also, assessments helping manage adaptively. That's captured in the graphic at the bottom. And it informs the decision. Future assessment makes clear whether management actions are working to reduce key stressors. And if not, new actions can be taken or steps can be taken to increase compliance with existing actions. Quickly finish, let me talk about future work. There are clearly good reasons to produce a revised coral reef resilience assessment protocol that includes the lessons learned during this and other related projects and combine guidance in a document-based protocol with interactive user-friendly training tools as well as analysis frameworks that automate aspects of the analysis and help people understand the types of actions managers could take to support resilience in their area. When a resilience assessment protocol is produced, and I think it will be in the coming years, it should contain at least these 4 elements, all of which were advanced through the project I've described today. Extended set of resilience indicators. So this is a culled set from the 61 that are scaled based on their evidence and importance. And a few of us and others that have noted that are listening to this call have been involved in this effort to survey coral reef scientists from around the world and work out what the average perceived importance, the level of scientific evidence there is about the various indicators and scale them based on that. So in the assessment I've been discussing today, which is based on the ACN 2009 protocol, the various resilience indicators that are used to produce resilience scores are all weighted equally. But intuitively that some indicators must be more important than others. And when you scale the indicators based on their importance or based on the level of evidence that we have that these actually confer resistance and recovery reefs, you can get different relative resilience rankings. Now, second, fourth, within the protocol, we need some recommendations about that and info gathering methodologies. How are we going to get the data? And we need to give people advice about that. And we need to produce some standard units for each indicator. So if we the units that are being used, we could standardize ranges for those units that correspond to the Likert scale scores of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 for each of the resilience factors. If we do that, then we'll be able to produce a resilience score that'll be comparable to other resilience scores being produced in other reef regions. And that you can use resilience assessments to prioritize the investment of resources at multiple spatial scales. You can do it at the region-wide scale and even global scale. If you were working for an organization that prioritized effort to different reef regions. So that was an exciting advancement on this that happened yet, but just by standardizing the units and working out, for all regions, what those what the ranges in those units should be for the score options. Also, provide guidance as to how to analyze the data, some of which you've heard today, and sets of tools and materials to automate aspects of the analysis, because I think that's going to increase uptake a lot. No, frozen.
Yeah, I can hear you. Your mouse moving. Your mouse is moving. I can that. I mean, it's not, but that's what I'm seeing.
You have presenter status back from me if you can. I'm not going to be able to show my last slide for some reason. I just frozen up. It's locked me up.
Oh, your computer's frozen. Okay.
I'm still in the mouse, but I can't get to my last presentation. Let's go ahead and go to the question and answer session. This is actually the second to last slide, so this is a good time for it to freeze. And the last slide has a few references. We'll make sure those are available to people.
Liz can put it up for you, Jeff. She's going to put it up.
Actually?
There you go.
Yeah. But if she could do that, that'd be great. Sorry about that, everyone that's listening, and that's unfortunate. I'm not sure that it worked okay earlier, but and he'll take you to the last slide now.
It's fine. Okay. Do you go to questions, or is it up? Oh,
no, just a few points before I finish. Again, apologies for this. We're not there, so we're reducing gas emissions by doing it this way, but there's always some technical things that come up. I'll conclude the same way I started, by making clear that I'm speaking on behalf of a large group of people that have worked to collect and analyze the data, present results, and think through how to make resilience assessments powerful decision-making tools for coral reef managers. Also, work was made possible by funds from the Nature Conservancy's Global Marine Program, and in particular the Asia Pacific Program, headed by Rod Solomon, Hawaii. Funds were also provided for some of the resilience assessments by IUCN and the MacArthur Foundation. Thanks for your interest in the discussion and for your time this evening/morning. And I know Steph's got some questions prepped, and I'm sure some of you have some interesting questions that we can walk through. But if questions not answered, or if you want to discuss this topic or an aspect of this topic in more detail, I've got my contact details there. I'm thinking this a lot and avidly interested in the topic and how we move forward to make these sorts of assessments more useful to people. So if you want to have questions, speak with me offline. That's be fine and encouraged. Over to you, Steph.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. We'll go ahead and start the question and answer session, but I know some people end up having to drop off, so I just want to make a quick announcement to remind people that if you're not signed up, please do sign up for our Reef Resilience newsletter. You can just contact us at resilience@tnc.org, and also check our news and events section on the website reefresilience.org. We are currently accepting applications from coral reef managers from Southeast Asia for our next Training of Trainers course, which is going to begin in January. So if you just contact us, we can give you information about how to apply. So I just want to make sure people have heard that. So we're going to go with questions, and in order to ask a question, if you want to actually speak, just need to click on the hand icon above the chat window, and we'll call on you. We do have some great questions that were asked in the session earlier today, so I wanted to get to those, depending on the questions we have now. So we're going to go ahead and start with a question from Allie Green. Liz, can you please unmute Allie?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Allie.
Well, first I just want to congratulate Jeff and the team about making some really great progress with all of this. And I just wanted to raise 2 points. One is a point and one is a question. One is that I'm a little concerned that you're using as the basis for the fish component, the Obura and Grimstitch report, because that was based on an older version, and it's actually got some problems with it. For example, the way that the herbivores are handled. So I think we should talk about this offline, Jeff, but I think my suggestion is that I just like people to know that that's not the best one to use for herbivores, and perhaps we can come back with a suggestion on how to do that better, perhaps through the McClanahan approach. But so in terms of when you're publishing this, I think you might want to reconsider how you've handled the herbivores, and I'd be happy to help you with that. So that's just one small piece. The other question...
Before question, can I comment on that?
Yeah, sure.
Most of it, all the data that we had on fit we used for this was reclassified based on your functional groups. So I think it's in a way what we did. We worked to include to the extent that we could the functional groups that you published in your
right.
stuff. So
I saw
it is the
herbivores and then all the functional groups. So I wasn't sure how you handled that.
Like so it's
separate category, and then the 4 categories. So, look, I think we don't want to confuse people with the detail on that, but perhaps we could have a discussion about that offline, Jeff, and just make sure that it's as it can be before it's published. Yeah.
Yeah. That's good.
People turn that the fish piece in Obura and Grimstitch is not quite right, and I've talked to them about updating it, and they were planning to, but they haven't got around to it. So please just be aware of that.
I think that's a great Ali. That's great.
Okay, and the other thing, I think I do like the way you've collected, you've suggested how you can use the site-based information, but in terms of able to use it for MPA design, what we really need to be able to do is take these sort of site-based assessments and work out how to develop GIS layers that we can use in systematic conservation planning, and I was wondering if you're working with anybody on that.
In part, so I've been involved in over maybe a dozen different types and different resilience assessments, and whether we produce GIS layers entirely on the target audience for the results. So we did a lot of that work in Australia. We didn't do much of that work in parts of Asia and the West Pacific that I've done this kind of thing for. It was dependent on the audience and the sort of resources we had. So, for example, in Australia, we used proxies for the set indicators that we had, and then we produced GIS maps for resilience. And so you could inform conservation planning if you had information at a range of spatial scales for the sort of resilience maps.
I think it would be a really great next step for you to consider. I've been doing this assessment of high priority needs for MPA network design, and the need to be able to use these site-based resilience developed to GIS layers for marine spatial planning keeps coming up. So maybe as a next step, you could perhaps put manual advice on how you do that and a case study from somewhere. I think that'd be really, really valuable.
Yeah, some other points that we haven't brought up yet, just in this little discussion, is that of course the more heterogeneous your SIMs are in the management area that you have, then the more site-based assessments you need to do to ensure that what you thought about a site was representative of the area around the site as well. So there's that adds another layer of complexity. But what we've worked in the past is that the site-based assessments would produce the different types of scores that I've mentioned. We would also potentially produce an uncertainty score and a score for representativeness. And then we drew lines around site-based assessment. How far around that site do we think the same resilience score would apply? And you would work to have converging lines all the way around your management area, which of course would depend on how homogeneous the environment is and how much resources you have. The point up is exactly right.
It's just it's not criticism. It's just the next step, I think, to make it more useful for another way of conservation planning.
I think it's a great point. I think it's important for people to realize that when the guidance does come out, that's another layer that has to be in there. You need guidance in there so people understand that a site assessment won't always inform systematic conservation planning. It depends entirely on heterogeneity of the environment and how much resources you have to do assessments. So it's a good point.
Yeah. But if you can provide advice on how to go from the site-based assessment to providing those GIS layers and a case study of doing it somewhere, so either in an active MP design, which I can do many of those right now, or looking at one that was done to see if it would change it, and maybe identify some places that weren't visited that should be, I think it'd be a lovely way to build on what you've done.
Yeah, before we move to someone else's question, let me just add to that. There's another thing. What would be really exciting about that type of analysis, and again, so different people have done disparate pieces of it, but they haven't come into one. And what we want to show is in areas, do you improve the resilience of the whole area versus resilience-based park planning principles on their own? So does doing the site-based assessment add value in which types of areas to add value? The people know to invest.
Yeah, I think the Palau design that we're probably going to be doing the next year would be a great case study to do that.
There's so much data, and that's right. Okay, let's chat more, Ali. I never see you enough.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Sure.
Thank you, Ali, for that question. I see that Peter has a question, and I've got it. And Peter, please correct me if I don't get this right. The question is regarding the degree to which the resilience indicators, the 50 or 60 that you listed, Jeff, are correlated, and what the artifacts might be with that. And Peter asking, why not put heads together and consolidate upon key metrics?
Yes, that's a great question, Peter. So in a way, I guess in statistical speak, Peter's asking whether the factors are autocorrelated once you get past 10 or 12 factors, and the answer is absolutely that they are autocorrelated. So that was the reason we wanted to advance on the IUCN 2009 protocol. So we've dealt with that by categorizing the factors and producing different scores for the different factor categories. So that's gotten most of the issue, because by 1/3 of the factors, using the remaining 2/3 and classifying them into 3 categories, we were almost all of the potential autocorrelation. But yes, people have put their heads together. Clanahan and Simon Donner and myself and Aaron McNeil led another workshop at IMCC in Canada. It was in May of this year. We started with a list of 61, moved quickly to a list that being at 31, and then we asked 34 reef scientists from around the world, and there are other people listening into this call that were involved in. We ranked the 31 indicators based on perceived importance and the scientific evidence for those factors. I mentioned that briefly as future work. So that's been done. We're probably a week or two away from submitting it, and we worked out what that group of scientists, what they suggest is the factors that need to be measured, and we'll be making recommendations based only on the current level of scientific evidence that resilience was conferred to sites as a result of the factor. And it ended up being a couple list, even less than 31. So more on that. I mean, I think there'll be a lot of talk as that paper comes out, and a lot of news will trickle down. I'm happy to talk in more detail about it offline, but we haven't submitted the paper yet, and we haven't refined exactly how we'll present those results. But the answer is yes. If people are putting heads together, we know intuitively that some indicators are more important than others. They should be scaled so that the relative importance of a real important factor is not diluted by factors that are not so important. And that's going right now. And the extent to which that changes the resilience rankings that are produced, it's sometimes not much, but sometimes a lot. So it is an important issue.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's one of the questions in the real session too.
Okay, good. I'll go back and see if I can figure which one that was. I have a question from Petch in Thailand. The question is there any way we can get around issues with long-term data consistency in Thailand? They have better data in terms of coral than fish. For example, they have more than 200 sites in the Andaman, but they only have a few dozen sites for fish. So it sounds like they're in balance there. I hope I don't want to interpret this, but does that?
I mean, as you put it, that's that's closely related to another of the questions that we hoped would come up, and it's a really important question. So what I was saying earlier today when we had the discussion, I was saying that it's really about consistency. So you need to have the same level of information for all various factors you're including in your analysis for all of your sites. So that's likely to work to exclude most of the sites that you have if you don't have information about both corals and fish. So, and there's a couple of other ways to go to get around that, and some are useful and some might not be. So you could just cull the list of indicators to the indicators that you can get information on. But if that's not giving you a complete picture of the resilience of the site, then that's not going to be a useful approach. What I recommend is that people look at all the information they have for all the factors that they can get information on, or the information they have for sites based on uncertainty as well. And we've done that for some of these resilience assessments. So you end up with a resilience score, the same decision support framework that I walked everyone through today, but each site has a composite uncertainty score based on types of information that you had for the site. That's interesting because it's another level to the decision support framework. So you might target action that reduces a stressor at a high resilience site, but only if your confidence that the site has high resilience is high, and they vary because you'd have uncertainty varying for each of your different sites. So I'm not sure what you were looking for as an answer, but the point is, you can see, you and I have been talking over email, and we can talk more, but you have to look at the level of information you have, you have to try to be consistent, and you probably need to consider including an uncertainty composite score as well. It's apparent when you're making recommendations to managers.
Jeff, we have a question from Steve and then Michelle. So Steve McKagan, can we unmute Steve? Are you muted, doubly muted? Steve, can you, for whatever reason we're not hearing you, do you mind typing?
He says he's going to type it now.
Okay, while doing that, why don't we go to Michelle? Can we open up the line for Michelle, Liz?
I can.
Thanks. It was open for a moment. Hey, Michelle, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you? Can you hear me?
Your voice. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I guess my question is, what scale do you apply these resilience indicators to? And by that I mean, how much do you have to do to be able to say that you have a good representation of the area? And say that because most managers manage their site as one entity. It's like they're going to do an assessment, they do it like for their area. It doesn't really matter how big or how much of the ecosystems are in the area. They just kind of treat it as one management entity. So I guess the scale of, at which you apply these indicators. That's the question. What's the ideal scale?
It's interesting because I think you've got a couple of questions there. So if you've got a management agency that's treating their entire area as one entity, and they have to make different decisions at sites than others, then you might learn much from a resilience assessment. A resilience assessment might not inform as many different types of management actions as would for a management agency that can implement different actions at different sites. Assuming you have the latter and you can implement different actions at different sites, then what I was saying before was that the resilience assessments that you undertake will be dependent on how heterogeneous or how different the environment is as you move along reefs and the level of resources. So if you have resources in a high variable environment, then you might do lots of these. But if not, then you might do less. I can see how it might be a slightly unsatisfying answer to your question. But here, for this, what we did was a site would be on the order of hundreds of meters, and we usually didn't have more than a kilometer or 2 kilometers like between sites. One of the areas where we did an intensive study. So in Chile, for example, there were lots of sites that are quite close together. In Bambuk, the sites are not so close together. So it depended.
I think that's a good answer. It's not so much in the scientific sense, I think, because you can have a lot of arguments on that, scientifically speaking. And I was asking more in on what kind of advice you give to managers who aren't necessarily marine scientists. I think this good place to start. Just tell them on the range maybe of hundreds of meters. I think that's a good place to start because sometimes you're not really dealing with the people who have a scientific background or anything, and they just kind of want the bottom line. So yeah, I think this is a good answer actually.
So
do hundreds of meters.
These are site-based assessments, and I mean, if you were going to, and I was recommending, if you were going to involve a manager in the assessment, then going to a site and working through the assessment is a nice way to get people across how the assessment informs different type of management decisions. But the scale over which you assess some of the indicators, so that was sort of going back to your very original question, actually depends. So for some factors like coral cover, it might be varying greatly at very small spatial scales. But for like some of the ways that currents are described using the resilience indicators, you might actually with the same score for all of your sites, and that will work then to distinguish sites. But the point is that there are many of the factors that won't vary much on the order of a couple of kilometers, that might at tens of kilometers, but not a couple of kilometers. So the indicator varies at different spatial scales in each different management area, but you can usually assess that before you start. It will help to inform, how far apart your sites should be in this site-based assessment.
With some meters, that's like a horizontal space. What about in depth data? Do you recommend to do it at more depth?
It depends entirely on how many different types of management actions you could inform with the assessment. So if you use the assessment to protect different types of reefs, which again that's sort of standard, the park planning, the resilience-based park planning principles, where you want all the different habitat types to be represented and replicated. Then if you're going to work out which of the reef flats to protect, then you might do assessments for a range of different reef flats. So for this we had standardized sort of reef crest to reef slope. So it was that coral reef environment that we were interested in learning about.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
If we have two more questions from folks that I want to see and get to. First, we've got Steve's question, and the question is, so much of the application, Steve's coming from Saipan, so much of the application of these types of findings seems to hinge on the use of protected areas. What application would do, Jeff, for areas like the CNMI and Guam, where adding, adjusting, or changing our current MPAs really isn't an option politically?
I think the answer there lies in some of the slides that I was presenting. I can manipulate screen. So I'm through some of this. Sorry, it's not coming up on this one, but I had 3 different types of management action options, and only one of them related to whether you would use resilience to select to include or exclude from a marine protected area. Your other 2 action options, which involve broad and local scale actions to reduce anthropogenic stress, could still be formed by the resilience assessment. So there's a range of different things range of different actions that you could use. The resilience assessment still informs those, but only if the resilience assessment is coupled, as I showed here, with an assessment of the levels of anthropogenic stress. So you couldn't use the resilience assessment to, again, include or exclude sites. You would still want to know which high resilience sites, which are the sites that are most likely to persist as disturbance frequencies increase, and which sites are experiencing a lot of stress that we can do something about. And then you would work with your manager counterparts, and I know where you work, so you work out which of those are feasible, and you would prioritize the feasible ones. So a resilience assessment would still inform a bunch of different types of action options for you, even though, as you say, you'd struggle to change your zoning.
Great, thanks, Jeff. I want to go ahead and see if we can unmute Jocelyn. Liz, can you mute Jocelyn? He's going to go ask the final question.
Yes. Hi, hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, yes. I was wondering, any way to incorporate any sort of social resilience layer of factor into the assessment? Because bottom line, at the end, people will still be using the resource, whether it's a managed or unmanaged area. But in the case of a managed area, you have a manager who's implementing the policies, actions, whatnot, to to try to maintain some degree of resilience. So what I'm thinking is, if possible at all, to incorporate some sort of a resilience factor. Do you think that your assessment of resilience using the 61 odd factors would still be true in terms of which sites would be more resilient than others, if there was some social component included in that?
Look, this is a fantastic question, Justin. To answer the last question you said, I think absolutely, because what we're talking about here is ecological resilience. But what I'm saying, though, is it's interesting because, yes, you could add social resilience indicators. Would I? I don't think so. What I think it would bring is a whole other element. So I had mentioned before that this decision support framework, and let's say you determine that there's a high resilience site that you're going to implement a specific action at, okay? And then that one way that you could engage with managers is to talk to them about those sites and those potential actions, and work through which is most feasible, and then implement the action that's most feasible. And I'm bringing that up is because if you had a social resilience assessment, then a layer of complexity in your decision-making process would be which is feasible action that's reducing resilience at a high resilience site that is not going to reduce the social resilience. So that's how I see it coming in. I don't see it being combined. I see it being another way to categorize factors and brings in another, different and very relevant, maybe the most relevant type of combination of situations that you could get. And again, it's going to be ones that don't reduce social resilience, that are feasible, that are reducing stress at a high resilience site that managers need to think about prioritizing. Now, they could prioritize others that do reduce social resilience, but it'll come at a cost, and there'll of course be more controversy with those. But if it's a really important site, then they'll have to weigh that up. But anyway, before we run out of time, and we can of course talk offline, and we have, and should continue to do so because I haven't heard from you in a while. But you got to be a separate framework. It's another layer to the decision-making process, not included in the ecological.
As you said, this is basically an ecological resilience assessment, but from a manager's perspective, and this is supposed to be a manager decision support tool, they have to consider that social side of it. So great as the ecological aspect is, and I appreciate that. From a management side, I have so many other things to factor in that probably supersede any one of those. So which is why I asked that question.
Yeah, and again, I completely agree with you. It's an ecological assessment, but it has to be combined with. It would be whenever they were going to make the decision, they were going to talk to people about how they were going to feel about it and what it meant to them, what it meant to their livelihoods, and so on. And that's got another layer in there, and I think it needs to be another factor category rather than something that looped in. It's a whole different field, and people need advice just about that. But anyway, that's the same decision support framework could still apply, though. It's a really good point, and that needs a lot of work, because otherwise this sort of stands too far alone, and it's too easy, I think, for those other considerations to get the profile in the decision-making process. And sometimes that'll be good, and sometimes it won't. It won't always be good for the overall resilience of the system, as your question suggests. Yeah.
Well, I want to go ahead and wrap things up. We're at the end of the call. I want to, thank everybody for sticking with us. Some of you are on very late tonight, and some of you are on very early, and we're just really appreciative of Jeff doing this for a second time for us today. For those of you that may have missed the beginning of the call or want to share this with colleagues, it is a recorded call. We will be putting it on the reefresilience.org website under our events and webinars tab, so you can download it or live stream it within the next day or so. We'll send an announcement with the link as soon as it's available. But again, thanks so much, Jeff, and thanks to everybody for excellent questions. It's really great to hear from everybody, and awesome to see some of our past colleagues that have gone through trainings with us to see tonight. So some of you not for a long time. So it's great to see everybody, and we hope to see you back for our next webinar. Great night. Have a great day, no matter wherever you are, and thanks again. Goodbye. Good day.
Thanks.
Okay, bye, Jeff.